You've done everything right. You're licensed, trained, ready to go, but the phone just isn't ringing. You're checking storm reports, you're refreshing your inbox, and you're wondering maybe you missed something. Meanwhile, other adjusters are out in the field making hay. So what's really going on here? And how do you break through? Today I'm talking with Andrew Price from Sedwick, one of the biggest firms in the industry. And he's going to walk us through exactly what firms are looking for right now and how to position yourself at the top of their first call list, even in a slow season. If you're ready to stop waiting and start deploying, let's get into it, starting now. This video is sponsored in part by the National Association of Catastrophe Adjusters. Become a member and join the thousands of adjusters who benefited from this critical organization at nacaadjuster.org.
I think what a lot of adjusters seem to miss is when you see a big hailstorm like that, and I used to be guilty of it too, right? We all watch the Weather Channel and then we freak out about, wow, we're not getting called, when all the Weather Channel is talking about all this damage that's going on. But you take a hailstorm, for example, that it's not miles and miles long, and then you divide that work by the number of insurance companies that these people are insured with, and then you divide that out by the number of IA firms that support those, and it really doesn't end up being as widespread as you really think it is if you just haven't been doing this long enough. So
yeah, and I counsel my students to never watch the Weather Channel. I mean, yeah. Or at least never to get like informed about the weather from them anyway.
Yeah.
So
I mean, their job is to sensationalize it all, right? I mean, for the most part. So.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm curious, in spite of all that stuff, you guys have been, getting FastTrack graduates for a while now. I'm curious how they're doing and if there's anything that we can add to the program or do that would make them show up even better for you guys?
No, I think for the most part, where people struggle is what you've focused on, right, in the FastTrack to deployment program, which is can you take information, can you process it, can you put that together in an estimate, can you get it forward to the company in a way that you're somewhat flexible in the way that you can present it, right? Every client company is different, every IA firm is different in what they might want in the reports, but the basics of writing an estimate are the same. Can you put together a damage estimate that makes sense, or using the right codes? And for that matter, no, we've not had any issues with the folks that we have deployed. I wish I had more specific data for you today, and I would share that with you, but I don't. All I know is that they have certainly asked about you and your program when we have an opportunity that typically will ask me first, have you talked to Matt? So I think they're certainly impressed with the number of folks that you've been able to send us. And in reality, and a lot of times, you've sent us people that we've needed in an area of need. Here in Dallas-Fort Worth, there's 1,000 of us every quarter mile. It just seems like there's so many people that are licensed in this area. But when you get somebody in a rural area of Illinois, or I think we've gotten one recently from Nevada, maybe one from Wyoming, you've got areas like that. They're just not as widespread, so people have to travel further to handle those claims. And so I've not seen anybody come across my desk that has been through your program and they say, we can't really use this person anymore. If they did, that would be one of those things where it wasn't because of somebody's claim handling as far as being able to write the estimate. It would typically because they overextended themselves. They might have jumped on with too many companies at the same time. They can't adhere to the claim handling guidelines as far as cycle times. That's usually where you see people fail. Not so much in being able to write an estimate. It's just trying to keep up with and making a priority of the people that they're deployed for.
Being a great adjuster isn't just about policy and software. You got to know the difference between hail damage and worn out shingles. Hague has the gold standard books and certifications to back you up in the field or at the desk. Scan the QR code or hit hagueeducation.com and use AdjusterTV for a discount and level up with Hague. You guys do carrier certifications for your adjusters, right?
Mm-hmm.
Allstate, State Farm, and whoever.
Yeah, I mean, Allstate's a weird one, right? Because Allstate doesn't have a real certification, meaning it's not put together by Allstate. So if you go to Pilot and you get Allstate certified, it's not like it's good here being a universal certification, and vice versa. If you get it here, it's not any good over at Crawford. It's just you've been trained to handle Allstate claims, which is good. We still look at that kind of thing. But the universal certifications, your State Farms and your TWIAs and your USAAs and that sort of thing, yes, we provide those just like a lot of companies do. And if you go get it anywhere else, it's just as good here, and vice versa. If you get it done here, it's just as good anywhere else, provided you get a copy of that certification.
Would it help for the students that you have that, or the adjusters that come to your particular carrier certifications and your trainings that are sort of like carrier centric, if they showed up having already been exposed to like ECS and maybe CPT, next gen, that kind of thing before they got there, maybe not certified, but they've at least, in other words, have a way to maybe do that, and also test them on it in FastTrack in our exam. And I'm just wondering if that's something that you think would be valuable.
Yeah, I think that would be, because occasionally we do get a request when we're looking for somebody that may have handled a particular estimating platform or a particular client management system, right? We're all used to saying Xactimate and Symbility, but we're not necessarily used to saying NextGen or Navigator or ECS or Guidewire, for that matter. Guidewire is really just an out-of-the-box program that people then customize. So, yeah, I think that exposure is really good. It's kind of hard because I guess, you might expose somebody to it. They might be able to have a general understanding of it, but then they take that course 3-6 months before that, and then they get deployed. It's kind of hard to then refresh that magic of what they might have been able to remember. But I've always been a proponent of getting as much exposure to anything I can, so at least I've seen it before I'm being deployed and being thrown into something. A lot of people struggle in that area because they think they're well trained, right? They know how to assess some damages, and they know how to write an estimate. They might know how to interpret a policy, but then they throw a curveball at them by saying, well, now you have to put all of that into this claims management system they've never seen before. So they're back behind the 8 ball again, right, of trying to be well versed in handling claims for a client that they've never seen a part of. I used a claim system back in the day where you did everything in it. You submitted your photos, you wrote your diary notes, you had to process checks, and of course, never having seen that, that's where the slowdown happens. And here you are trying to close claims quickly. It's kind of delayed when you have to use a system that you've not seen before. And there's no real industry-wide training available on those types of things. You typically don't get that kind of training until you're deployed for the client in which you're going to be able to handle those claims for.
Right, and like a half-day orientation on a hurricane.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we used to do back in the day, right? You get a quick refresher, and then, to me, sometimes it's a little easier when you work in the desk environment if you're in office. A lot of that kind of work is remote now. I think COVID changed the rules on a ton of that kind of stuff, but in-office work is so much easier when you're really trying to help people with a claims management system like that, because you have people around you that you can show things to. And even though we have environments that, in fact, we're on one now, right, where we're talking to one another, it's just it's takes a little bit more time to log into something than it does to just lean back in your chair and say, hey, where do you click on this to find that, and have your neighbor be able to show you. I think that's where we're missing a little bit of those types of things.
All right, if you're making real money as an adjuster, don't leave your career exposed. Errors and omissions and general liability insurance from Kaplik is designed just for you, and it might even be cheaper than what you're already paying. Snap this QR code right here or visit cplic.net/AdjusterTV to grab the free guide and lock in smarter protection today. Now, do you guys, do you have like in-person like desk jobs where you have like a call center or like a building with full of cubicles where people can come work?
Yeah, we do. For the most part, that kind of work is in Dallas, Texas, but most of our clients, people work remotely for them here now. That's just kind of the way we do it. I think you find that even other companies that I talk to, they will allow remote work if people are meeting certain metrics, right? Sometimes they require you to go in an office, you learn everything you need to learn, you start meeting the metrics that they want you to meet, and then they allow you to go home from there. And as long as you maintain that, you can continue to work home from there. I think the natural inclination for people that work at home is, I'm going to take a break here, not work as hard there. But we've really not seen that with the way we can capture those metrics. People like that environment, and they want to keep that environment, so therefore they've been able to adhere to whatever we put in place. So it's been fairly effective. We've not gone back, in fact, to really in-office work other than just a couple of clients that require us to put some folks in place there in that Dallas office.
Gotcha. So what are the sort of like the opportunities for remote desk work look like with Sedwick?
Pretty much the same as you'd find anywhere else, right? We have field opportunities that need desk adjusters to review, as far as being the claims examiner. Maybe you have somebody in the field that's writing the estimate and submitting it in-house for that person to then settle the loss. In fact, when I started in this industry, we did everything, right? You went out in the field, you wrote the estimate on site, you settled it on site. A lot of times now, field adjusters submit it to either a desk adjuster that works for the firm or a desk adjuster that works for the client company. But no, we have all the same opportunities. We do auto and property, workers' comp, inland marine, aviation. But when you get into those types, the inland marines, the aviations, those are very niche fields with very small turnover, because people that get into it really don't want to get out. So it makes it hard to fill those roles.
Right.
The majority of our desk stuff, the majority of our desk stuff is going to be field related, auto related, those types of claims that you're writing a portion of it or writing all of it, depending upon what the setup is. Are you dealing with an inspector in the field who's submitting their documentation, or are you working with the homeowner? Then you're trying to fast track the claim. That's kind of what we do.
Gotcha. So then on the other side, on the field side of things for property claims, what are your needs there? Are you guys looking for more people to do photo and scope stuff? And do those photo and scopers, do they also write, or is that just for the desk adjuster?
Yeah, so, if you think back to our industry again, when we started, you and I started in this industry, there weren't inspectors, right? It was just, in fact, we didn't even get daily work that I remember back in the day. I started in 2004. Yeah. The only thing that was available to us as IAs was catastrophe work. So when you were deployed, you were truly deployed. You were deployed on a CAT. It lasted however long it lasted, and then you came home and you sat and you waited till the next thing. Then you have the evolution of desk adjusting and inspections and a variety of different things that we just didn't have. Daily claims was certainly not available to us back at the time. So yeah, on the field side, I think as an IA firm, you're always looking to add people to your roster. That's sort of the nature of the beast, because you have just as many people leaving it as getting into it, right? You got into it. Maybe you had some false expectations of what you were getting into. Maybe you didn't have the proper training. Maybe you didn't have the money set aside to realize there was going to be a lull before you could get deployed. And so very quickly, you're out of money, you're out of options, and you have to move on to do something else. So I think we're always filling those roles, but you're going to find that, this week we may have an area of need in Kentucky, and then next week that area of need is shifted to Chicago, Illinois. I think the majority of folks right now are there and available for CAT work. It just hasn't been a lot of it this year so far. So the majority of the folks that I see are handling daily claims in and around their area, sometimes with just us, sometimes with us and another company to pick up enough work to make it worth their while. But that need kind of changes from day to day as far as the field work goes.
Let's talk a little bit about that sort of daily piece. If an adjuster, maybe coming from FastTrack, is interested in getting into that track and working regionally or locally, what is the path that you guys, the ideal path for that person?
As long as they have a background in being able to write the estimate, we're going to look at them just like we do anybody else, right? What does your experience and skill set say about you? The way that you create a profile here is by applying. You apply, you create your profile. That's kind of a snapshot of who you are. I think the struggle that we see a lot of times with adjusters getting into this industry is they are told to apply for anybody and everybody out there. And I think there's pros and cons to that, right? You have,
sure.
Back when we started, you might have heard of a few different companies that are still around today. Some are not still around today. Now there's also 100 companies that are around that you may or may not have ever heard of before. And so the thought process of going and creating your profile at these various companies is kind of difficult, because then every company out there, including ours, is expecting you to keep up with what you've put in there about yourself, or requiring you to complete certain tasks within that company to stay relevant to the people that are deploying you, and we're no different. So in our case, updating that information is the most important thing. If you've been on the FastTrack side and you're wanting to move into the field, have you updated any of your information? A lot of times when people call and they say, hey, I'm just checking to see if you have anything, first thing I do is look at their profile, and sometimes I see they haven't even logged into it in a year, yet they've gained significant experience or skill sets or background or certifications or licenses, and none of that has been updated. So the first thing we're going to look at is just like anything else. We're going to look at where do they fit? Have they updated their information? Is their address current? A lot of times people will say, well, I'm looking for work in Chicago, and we'll say, but we show you live in Naples, Florida. Oh, well, yeah, I moved about 6 months ago, but they haven't updated their information. So, and that makes it hard to do when you've signed up for 50 different firms. Now, don't get me wrong, because I completely understand that the goal is to have as many options to work as you can. That's what we do as IAs. But if you don't stay up to date with that information, I have found time and time again that those companies are looking for the people that are the most up to date on their information, that are building relationships within the company. And if you've already, on our side, for example, already built a relationship on the FastTrack side, and you have a manager who also happens to work for a client that is submitting claims or providing claim work for the field side, it's really easy to then say, hey, I'd like to transition out into this area, provided there's something in my area. I think, again, that's about building those relationships and making sure that you're there to understand that those people can help you move forward into the next steps, rather than trying to start all over by just changing your profile and not doing anything else to support that.
For somebody who maybe isn't familiar with who Sedwick is and what you guys do, maybe kind of give us a little bit of a background, sort of elevator pitch of Sedwick as a company and an IA firm.
Well, Sedwick is somewhat unique, right? Because at most IA firms that you've heard of out there, they hire independent adjusters and they put them to work in a variety of things that we've talked about today. Your field work, your desk work, your inspections, daily claims, cat work. And you'll find that some claims are global, some claims are national, some claims are regional. And every adjuster out there has to kind of figure out, well, what fits me exactly? What am I looking to do? I think a lot of people don't really they don't do that research up front. And so it is helpful to do things like this where you find out, well, what does this company do? Here we're a little bit different because we hire both staff and independents. So instead of only having the independent side, we actually have staff adjusters that are just what you'd expect. They're full-time colleagues with benefits, paid time off, and they work a variety of both CAT and daily claims in their respective regions. We have about 7 regions that we've split the United States in. We're also global. We're in about 65 countries. For the most part, my team handles the United States, although we have deployed from the United States to Canada, to Latin America, and to Australia within the last year to 2 years when we've exceeded resources in those areas. A lot of people will come on board and say, well, how do I get to work, in another country like that? And it really comes down to, well, do you live there regularly? Do you speak the language? Do you write the language fluently? As to whether or not we would look at you for those opportunities. Because just like anywhere else, if you live in Texas, we're probably going to deploy to Texas first before we go outside of Texas. And it's no different in the United States. We'll deploy to the United States first before we were to bring in resources from, say, Canada or Latin America. So for us, we are a global company, but primarily we focus these kinds of calls on the United States. We do hire both staff and independents. So sometimes independents say, well, won't that be a little bit of a competition for me, right, to be able to get work if you already have staff adjusters? But the way that we separate that is we have the staff adjusters handle certain clients and the independents handle different clients. So occasionally we can pull from one to help the other, but we're not really saying, well, we'll call you after we fill this role or that role. We handle a variety of things here, just like a number of other companies do. We handle the field side, both CAT and daily claim for property. We do auto. We do inland marine. We do aviation. We do commercial accident response. We have a huge contents team. So I think what people have to think about when they're looking to get on board with us or any other firm in this industry is you have to think about, where do you want to go? What are you trying to do? And then what does that company offer that's going to fit me the best? We're not the best fit for everybody, just as everybody's not the best fit for us.
Sure.
I think the hard part in this industry too is that a lot of people think there's only one path. They say, well, I go get my license, and then licensed people said I apply for everybody, and then I just go to work when I get deployed. But there's a whole lot of pieces in between there that people forget to tell them about. We all get sucked in, I think, because of all the money our friends made, right? They never tell you how much money they spent, how much time they spent, how much networking they had to do, how many trainings they had to attend. And I think those pieces are really important to your next steps. If not, then what you're going to end up doing is you're going to get yourself caught into this group of adjusters that sort of are like a flock of birds, right? We all chase the same work because the client is coming out with, here's some claims over here, so here goes the flock of birds. And we're all treating this as that the only thing and the only option out there is this one thing. But the more you diversify your skill set, the better off you're going to be able to do as an adjuster to compete with less people for different kinds of work. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir. So, you mentioned it, but I'm curious about the commercial accident response, like man-made disasters, like is that oil spills and all that kind of stuff?
Well, our commercial accident response team is actually relates to auto, and typically if you have a trucking accident, then you're contacted, 2:00 in the morning to run out and handle the scene of that accident. That's what our commercial accident response team is. Now, there are environmental type, like several years ago we saw the BP oil spill, right? Those types of environmental losses as well. We don't do a ton of that kind of stuff. I think there are some companies out there that sort of specialize in that type of work. We own our own engineering firm, EFI Global. So in the event that they're notified of potential areas of opportunity to work handling those types of claims, then they would loop us in as necessary, typically through our clients.
Gotcha. Let's talk about third-party training a little bit and certifications. How much weight does Sedwick put on third-party property adjuster training like FastTrack, which we go over the whole claims process and teach them how to use Xactimate and everything. How does that present when somebody shows up on your doorstep?
Yeah, so what I explained to everybody is there are basically 4 buckets of people, right, that every firm out there, including ours, is looking at when they're looking to deploy people for an opportunity. The first bucket of people are those people that have worked for us before and done a good job, right? If you've worked for the company before, you get rated. Typically, your ratings correlate with something like A through F, just like in school, what we would expect. A adjusters are awesome, F adjusters, not so much. So if you've worked for us before, the first bucket of people or ones we're going to look at are the ones that have done a good job and we want to deploy again. Now, as an adjuster, you too should also want that. If you're doing a good job somewhere, you want them to call you back time and time again. So we go first to that bucket of those people that are rated. The second bucket we look to are the people that have created profiles within our platform, and they have some sort of verifiable industry experience. Maybe you haven't worked for us yet, but we can verify that you've worked for a number of other firms. You've worked for a variety of clients. We can see what type of claims you've handled. That verifiable industry experience is the next group of people that we'd look at. The next group of people that we would look at are the ones that, well, you haven't worked anywhere yet, but you come from a program that we have vetted, right? A number of adjusting schools are out there. When I started in this industry 21 years ago almost, Vail and Leonard's were the only 2 places anybody had ever heard of as a school, right?
Right.
Now a lot of people have an opportunity for a school, but what we have to do on the client side or on the firm side is we really have to vet the programs like we have with you. We've gone through and determined what is being taught in the class. And is this somebody that we want to say that we're going to put our name on so that if, Bob or Mary comes through this particular course, are we going to say that we'd look to them before we would look to somebody else that's been through a course that we don't know anything about or somebody that has no experience? And that absolutely, to your question, does add weight. That's absolutely what we look for. Because the last group of people are the people that they've got their license and they have no verifiable experience. They have no industry-related training that we're aware of. So those are the 4 buckets of people that, we look at. So if you're in those buckets of people, you might be thinking, well, if I'm in the first bucket, I'm going to get called all the time. I might not get called as much if I'm in the second bucket, maybe not so much in the third, and probably never on the fourth, which is not entirely true, because what you have to figure out as a firm is if I have a storm in California and I send all my A-rated adjusters to California, what am I going to do when something hits Kentucky right behind it? Am I only going to send them B's or C's or F's, or am I only going to use people I've never used before? So I think what a lot of companies have developed out there, including ours, is an algorithm to say, look, we're going to take a percentage of these people that are available and can respond and meet, all the various qualifications for this particular event. And we're going to have to say, look, we're going to have to send a percentage of each of those 4 buckets of people, because if you don't keep the people that you work with regularly busy, they won't be there for you. And if you don't infuse at least some of the new talent that's coming into the industry into those groups, you're not going to build your bench strength for when you have an opportunity to deploy more people than what you're trying to do right now. So I think that's important for people to understand, is kind of what group do you fit in and how are you going to move up in that group. And going through the program like what you've put together is a great way to do that, because especially with us, and I know a number of other folks at firms that also work with you in this, is that we have found success in putting people together that have trained well in a system or a process that need then very little enhancements to that training other than the client-specific part that we talked about earlier.
Right on. So in bucket number 3, which is the no experience but has a vetted training, let's maybe talk a little bit about, beyond the property training part itself and maybe some other certifications that can get layered on top of that. Like you guys look at the IICRC, like WRT, FSRT certifications or Hague's certified inspector.
Yeah, I was always told, this stuck with me a long time ago, is that the more initials you have after your name, the more money you can command. And it's kind of unique in that way, right? Certainly, I'm going to look at Matt Allen. If it says AIC or CPCU or CPAU, or, if it says these things, I know that you've gone through the required education and training in this industry that holds a lot of weight. So therefore, it's going to hold a lot of weight here. If I'm looking at Andrew Price and he hasn't really done any of those kinds of things, then I have to default back on something else. So in the first part we're going to look at is absolutely where have you been trained? And then after that, what else have you gotten? What industry certifications? Have you gone through Hague's Wind and Hail course, right? Have you gone through any kind of steep and tall training or rope and harness training? Do you have your AIC? Do you have your CPCU? What types of industry-related training have you gotten that might help us understand what kind of person we're getting into when we're trying to provide you an opportunity and we have nothing to base that on?
Gotcha. What do you think about drones?
We get this question a lot. In fact, the question that we get more often now is AI, right? Drones was the question from 5 years ago. Now
that was going to be my next question.
Yeah. Now the question is AI. But let's go back to drones because that'll set up the AI conversation. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, drones were going to take over the industry. Drones were going to put field adjusters out of a job. We hear that time and time again. And anytime something comes up, it's the next thing that's going to put adjusters out of a job. I'm of the mindset that you have to adapt with the technology, right? That's coming on board. And if you do that, you'll be in the forefront of being continually deployed like you are now because you're on top of those different types of technology. But the thing about a drone is, whereas it can capture great information, it still can't perform an inspection, right? A drone, as detailed as they get, cannot tell you if there are 2 layers of shingles on the roof. A drone cannot tell you if the drip edge is painted. A drone cannot tell you if the shingles are repairable. That all has to be done with an inspection, a physical inspection. So I think that the drones, in my opinion, are just another tool that I can use as an adjuster, provided, again, I'm in an area that doesn't restrict me and being able to use that drone as far as the flying, as whether or not I have my 107 or not and what's required from that. So there's a lot of restrictions that people don't think about when it comes to drones, in an area that might have some coverage that doesn't even allow you to see what you need to with that drone. So I think, again, it's just another tool that you would use, like a pitch gauge or a shingle gauge. It's another tool in your tool belt that you can use to enhance your inspection, but I don't think it's going to take over as far as what we see or what we think. Now, AI, on the other hand, maybe that's a little different, I guess, right?
Sure. Before we jump into AI, for as far as like adjusters that are on your roster and that are deployable, are there some best use cases for drones? Is it smart for them to have one in the back seat of their truck?
It's not a requirement that we have or even a recommendation at this point. It's just that we don't mind that people use that as a tool as part of their, like I said, their tool belt that they use inspecting claims. I think there's always a use for something that enhances your ability to perform an inspection. But I wouldn't solely require somebody to use that or rely. I wouldn't solely rely on that. I couldn't think of the word. Yeah, I wouldn't rely on that as far as that goes. If you think about it too, a lot of client companies were creating drone departments that really haven't gone anywhere, not from the inspecting side. Now, they've used it on the underwriting side a lot, and they'll certainly send out in the oncoming hurricanes, right? They'll send it out to kind of cover areas where they have a large PIF count, because it's a great way for them to sort of get some before pictures as to what it looked like before they had the opportunity to get out and inspect it when there's damage after the fact. And we saw that, in fact, even as far back as Katrina. Now, drones were not as heavily utilized, as more satellite footage then, but that's kind of what they're using it for now.
Gotcha. Yeah, I generally tell people you're probably not going to be able to use it, like you said, solely for your entire inspection, because you have to ground truth and you have to put your finger on the roof and everything.
Sure.
But if you have a situation, especially wind or tree damage, where you can get to the top of your ladder and check the layers or whatever, but it's a 14, 12 2.5-story slate roof. No way in the world you're walking on that thing.
Yep.
I'm sending my drone up to get pictures of that thing. So, but let's talk about AI a little bit and kind of, I had an interesting conversation with Verisk a few months ago where suddenly light bulb moment was like, hold on a second. If Xactimate Mobile can identify objects using, AR object recognition or whatever, and they can say, I mean, you can do this right now in Xactimate Mobile, and it'll take a picture of this and it'll say glasses, right? What's stopping the machine learning from all those assignments that they run through and the abilities of the iPhone with LiDAR and everything to gather data? You can probably, certainly could take a picture, have the insured take a picture of a water spot on the ceiling. And if AI can't identify a water spot, I mean, then I'm missing something. And immediately they were like, let's get on a call. And so we talked about it, and they reassured me that no, it's just a tool and everything. But I'm curious, and you don't have to obviously tell me confidential or proprietary or corporate secret stuff. But I'm just kind of curious in general what the sort of attitude and the thoughts and maybe the planning is around the capabilities of AI, because it's pretty powerful stuff.
Sure.
It's basically a plain language programming for computers. And I think even Google is going to be, regular Google search is being taken over by, let's just ask ChatGPT.
Yeah. That's a great question. I don't know. I mean, I think we're all sort of speculating still at this point because no one has released the thing that's changing what we currently do. I think it's all in sort of production, isn't it, in a variety of places. If you think about apps were all going to change the way that we handle things. In reality, there's so many different apps now that they sort of compete with one another, that you use this one at this company and this one at this company. Several years ago, back at NACA, as an example, we had everybody there that was the next photo labeling app, right? And then where are those now? And Schedule It, and the number of companies that were going to schedule claims. But again, that they're not so prevalent in the industry anymore. So I think it's going to depend on sort of what they use it for. I'm curious, just like everybody else is. I think back to auto claims that I've had myself, and that was not seen by a field adjuster. They didn't come out and assess the damage. I did do that through an app. It was handled through, photos that I took and a computer system, and then, but an adjuster at the end of the day reviewed the information and made the determination on coverage. So I don't know that we can ever see an elimination of our roles, but maybe a shift to not as many, field adjusters as desk adjusters. And the reason I say that is because I think back to inspections that weren't around until probably after Hurricane Sandy, as much as they are today. A lot of adjusters thought that was going to also take their job. And I was a little bit on a different mindset because, most of the time when a claim comes through to a client, they triage it, right? They say, well, these are pretty severe and these are less severe. And what they generally do is they say, well, if this is significant, we're going to send it to a field adjuster. And if it's a fence down, and to your point, a stain on the ceiling, we're going to send that to a desk adjuster. But a lot of times what the desk adjuster does is they get it and they're now hands-on with it. They say, well, this is a little more complicated than just grabbing the information over the phone. I don't really need to send it to a field, but if I had an inspector go out, I might be able to have them take a photograph, video conference with me, get a couple of measurements, and then I can write it. So that's where the inspection side was born. And so adjusters were of the mindset, well, this is going to work me out of a job. When in reality, as a field adjuster, I wanted the ones that were the highest billers, right? I wanted the ones that were going to go out and maximize my time where I could see maybe less claims and bill more. I didn't personally want the one with the fence down and the leak in the bathroom ceiling, so I didn't really have a problem with those types of claims then going to a desk adjuster. And I know there are other people that agree with that, and there are people that disagree with that, but that's just the reality of where it was. So I'm curious, as when we talk about this next phase of AI, what are they going to do? Are they going to then now be able to eliminate the inspector role by then having the, as you just indicated, an insured use an app that takes photographs, submits it, even AI can put together what it can put together, but still, who's going to make that determination of coverage? At this point in time, that's still a licensed adjuster that has to make those coverage determinations. You still have the need for in my opinion, file reviewers, somebody that's got to ensure compliance to the client before it moves forward to that phase, especially with the fact that you may have some sort of SLA that says, if we're not within a certain percentage of correctness on our estimate, then we have to pay back money that we've, made on these claims. So I'm not sure. I think we might see a shift, especially when you start thinking about things like even hover and the way that we've been able to, capture roof damages and measurements, and then now moving into exteriors and interiors. I think the advances in technology are going to, again, if you embrace those and you roll with those things, then you'll be one of those people that continues to be deployed in those areas. The problem that I think we still fall back on is that this is a very easy industry to get into, just not to get work. Meaning all I have to do to get a license is go take a 30-hour course. But then after that, well, what do I do next? There's not a real push in my opinion, of my experience so far, of seeing these licensing schools saying, okay, here's the proper steps for perhaps what you should do next. Some of them do a good job of that. Others are just there to get them licensed, and then, they throw them to the industry. And after that, people are sort of stuck. And I know this because I look at a lot of those Facebook pages for adjusters, and they all have great questions, but the problem is there's a million different answers based on your question. It all depends on what you specifically are wanting to do and then what you're looking for in a company that handles that kind of work.
Right on. Yeah, so I guess the bottom line with AI, like you said, we can't really see around the corner. Who knows, right? Because it has such an impact on so many different things that it's really not possible to predict how they're all going to kind of interact and interleave with each other. And, again, like you said, AI is not going to take our jobs, at least not in the, foreseeable future. But a guy who's good at using AI may take your job, or, be the one who gets to work.
And it's like that with anything that we deal with, right? If you don't know Xactimate, but you want to be deployed on a loss, you're going to get released much quicker than the person who's Xactimate level 2 or 3 certified. Somebody knows to write an estimate. And that goes back to those contractors that I see time and time again that are excellent at assessing damage. They can build a house with their eyes closed, but they never learn the estimating system. And whereas they could write an estimate probably better than the rest of it, that's just not where the industry is, right? The industry says, we want you to use, or the clients in particular say, we want you to use this estimating system. And so I've seen some people with great knowledge on that side of it fail because they just didn't have the well-rounded nature of what we have to do as an adjuster, and in fact, in this case, using that technology. Maybe they're still stuck in, green sheets, I think I heard back in the day that people used to estimate the loss.
Yeah, that was before my time. So speaking of Xactimate, a couple questions for you. Number one, when you see somebody has level 2 on their resume, how much weight does that carry for most of your clients?
More than level 1. Level one tells 0. me you know how to turn on the computer and you know what Xactimate is, but level 2 tells me that you should know how to use it for the most part, right? Now, I also like to look at where you got that Xactimate knowledge, if it's possible. And what I mean by that is there are a lot of companies out there that teach Xactimate all by itself. I'm not really a proponent of that. I'm a proponent of learning Xactimate as long as it comes with a part of another course, like a boot camp or an Adjuster 101, something that's going to teach you not only what the program does, but how to use it. And I think that's the difference between a lot of Xactimate courses. People that tend to teach, and not everybody, so I'm not trying to generalize, but a lot of times what I've seen is these Xactimate courses that teach just Xactimate is they do teach you what the program does, but they're not really teaching you how to apply that to a loss. And what you really need to know is, well, when I've gathered this information that I'm looking at in maybe a house that's built or have damages, and I can see that, maybe I'm working from photographs, but I can see the damages, and now I want to take that and I want to apply it, not only just to write an estimate on it and create a bunch of sketches, but how does the claim come to me? And then once I have it, where do I find the information in it? How do I change the information in it? How do I then create an estimate? And then more importantly, how do I print that out and then settle that loss? How do I explain this particular estimate to someone? How do I justify it in my claim file? I'd heard a long time ago that your photos are independent, your diary is independent, and your estimate is independent of one another, but they should all three be telling the same story, right? If you look at somebody's photos, you should know what their estimate's about to say and what their diary should say, and vice versa. The diary should tell you what you're about to see on the estimate and what the photos are going to see. That's the way that it should work. So yes, to your question, we absolutely look at somebody that's level 2 certified. It means more than not having a certification, right? It means more than being level 1 certified. And then of course level 3 is really for those people that are going to be trainers. But if you have that down, then you're really kind of, above the bar.
Gotcha. Yeah, when I went and got my Xactimate Certified Trainer certification, I really wanted to be able to train Xactimate in the context of a claim. So I do have a standalone sort of, it's Xactimate level 1 and then Xactimate level 2, but they are taught in the context of claims handling. So it's not, and I've noticed this about other like standalone trainers, is that they, even though it's like they may teach just the software, but they're still teaching it sort of like from the perspective of a PA or a contractor. So mine's from the perspective of an adjuster, and it's also included with FastTrack to deployment because every lesson in that training, we dip into Xactimate one way or another, or Exact Analysis. If they've never used Xactimate before, I make them go through level 1.
Yeah.
Even just going through the training.
Yeah, you got to know the basics, right?
Because
you got to go in the route.
Yeah, teach them how to search for things, where the buttons are, all that kind of stuff, how to make a basic sketch. Our FastTrack is not like a super advanced like Xactimate program, but most claims that you handle you're not doing like Disney princess castles and spiral staircases and
like the level 3 exam house. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And you're not going to sketch all that. It's just the way that goes. And most of the time you're not even on a total loss. You're not stick building in Xactimate. Marshall and Swift that evaluation tool. Day.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that it also, I don't know. There's people will get hung up on, like I do my weekly claims clinic, our live component of FastTrack, and people will get hung up on like cornice returns on roofs and things like that. Well, how do I make that? And how do I? They spend hours trying to figure it out. And I'm like, take your tape measure. It's 2 feet that way, 3 feet that way times 8, right?
Right.
And then just manually add that in and move on, right?
Yep.
So they kind of get. So I make that sure that there's a fundamental understanding of what we're doing is we're trying to get that number, and all sketches, all this stuff is just a way for the software to give it the dimensions of things so that it can give you that bottom line number. And that's all we're after, really.
Yeah. Well, and even when you look at stuff like EagleView and how far it's come, when so many clients have that imported directly into the claim file, where it's applicable. In fact, that's where I've seen adjusters fail, is that they're so used to using EagleView, they don't remember or know how to measure a roof. So when you're in Georgia, when it's all tree coverage and there's no availability to see the actual sketch being pulled in, and now you have to measure it, that's where they struggle to write that estimate, because they can't put that into Xactimate. So I like that advance in technology, but again, it's just another tool to help assist you to make sure that that's an accurate estimate, because it's got your name on it at the end of the day. So somebody decides to push that into the next phase of the claim cycle, and your name's attached to it, you're going to have to justify what you've written, and you can only do that if you really have the knowledge of how to put that together. And I think that's where, and I push people to AdjusterTV all the time when they're getting into this, because I think it's important to understand what you're getting into, and you do a good job of just putting together a whole bunch of different videos on these are the things that you're going to want to know as an adjuster, all the stuff that people wish, like us, wish somebody had told us getting into this. And if you don't do that research, you're not going to. When I started, I was thrown into a hurricane, and I tell this on every orientation that I teach, that is, if only one hurricane had hit that year, I'd have been cut in the first 2 weeks, because I was terrible. I didn't know what I didn't know. I was brand new, I had little to no experience, and so they threw me in, and I was able to figure it out. But I was only able to figure it out because 4 hurricanes hit back to back, and I didn't have the opportunity to be cut because they couldn't afford to cut me. Right at the time, I was like a warm body. But by the end of the 10 months that I was deployed, well, yeah, you should be able to figure it out. You don't really get that opportunity like that these days. You're there. You're held to things we were never held to. I wasn't held to a cycle time. Cycle times was not something they ever measured back then. Neither was social media wasn't prevalent, right? So now those two things right there are killing brand new adjusters, because if you can't close a claim quickly, you're one of the first ones that they release. And if you can't handle claims properly and have the right attitude and have great customer service skills, then your name gets blasted all over social media with their the poor experience that the policyholder had.
Right.
And so if you can't overcome those two things, then that's how I was saying earlier that there's such a huge attrition in this industry. People get right out of it because they weren't set up with the proper expectations and knowing what they were getting into.
Yeah, totally. Now, so Xactimate still industry leader, but we do have CoreLogic out there. Do you guys have a requirement for that? Do you have clients who require adjusters to use?
Yeah, we have certain clients
CoreLogic?
that only use Symbility or CoreLogic in this case. I do tell a lot of people that Xactimate still has the industry hold, probably 75, 80%, I would guess. That's no specific number. I have them just guessing based on the number of clients that we have that probably use Xactimate over Symbility. But that Symbility list is growing. It seems like every time we turn around, another company has picked up Symbility or has shifted over to Symbility. And so, we have certain clients that require it. So you have to have, that experience. We do have here a couple of tests that we can give people to say, okay, what's your basic understanding? Can you write an estimate in it and send it to them? And if they can, then that's usually pretty easy to pass. If they've gone through CoreLogic certification courses and they can show us proof of that, that's another thing we'd look at as well.
I don't know that I have really any more questions that I can think of. Do you have anything, going into the summer, anything that you wanted to share with our viewers or FastTrack students or?
No, we appreciate everything that you do, Matt. I tell people all the time, I talk about you, I talk about AdjusterTV. I think people that know me kind of think that I have the similar mindset as I work for a company. And I'll tell you anything you want to know about the company, right? I work for Sedwick. But I'm also one of those people that wants to help you further your career wherever that is, whether it's here or somewhere else. Because, and I've got this from you before, but if you serve the industry, right, we serve ourselves. Because ultimately, if we grow this industry, it's because we're growing ourselves. And I think the hard part to think about for a lot of these folks is that there's a lot of work that goes into what we do. And I think many people are misled that it's not that difficult in the beginning. They get their license and then they think they're just going to go out and apply for these companies and they're going to be put to work and they're going to be trained on the job. And the reality of it is that's not the case, especially here. And I know a number of companies that are the same way. Our expectation is that you had some sort of training on the kinds of things that you do, right? The estimating, the scoping, the policy interpretation, and that you can apply those skills. And then we have people on staff that will certainly help you when you have questions related to things you haven't seen before or a policy question that you may have, but they're not going to be there on the beginning of a storm to teach you what the difference is between a dimensional and a 3-tab shingle. That's just something that, we sort of expect that you've... the biggest thing about us is we just rebranded, which is kind of nice. We got rid of the old stodgy corporate blue, logo. It's always nice to rebrand when you're updating logos and things like that. So the marketing team has been great about rolling that out. We tend to send out a newsletter to our folks that are in our network. We send that out once a quarter, and it will include any kind of updates that we have and what's going on. And I know that here in the next month or so, we'll do some virtual meet and greets where people can come on and just see some of the folks and put faces to names and answer or ask a ton of questions, and we'll answer for whatever they have. I think that's one of the things that we've worked really hard on is just connecting ourselves. We do things a little bit differently at Sedwick. When you apply here, I know at some firms, rather, you apply, you fill out a bunch of paperwork, you get on board, you may or may not have talked to somebody, and then you sort of move through the process. We do it a little bit differently. When you apply at Sedwick, we will invite you to an orientation. We have them a couple of times a week. They're live. They're almost always with me or with Tara Peterson, who's a part of our team. And we go through about 40 minutes of everything you'd ever want to know about working at Sedwick before you really have to do anything. That way it helps you decide, is this the best fit for me? Is Sedwick really what I'm looking for?
Sure.
Do I want to do something different? And I'll sit on that end of that phone call and I'll answer as many questions as long as people want to go. And they don't have to be about Sedwick. I tell them all the time, these can be industry questions. If you have questions that you just don't know what you don't know, there were people that were kind enough early in my career to do the same thing for me, so we're willing to do that for you, whether you want to end up here or not. So we go through our orientation, and if you feel that we're the best fit for you, then we move you forward to onboarding from there. And it's been very successful. We initiated that when I came on board to Sedwick about almost 4 years ago, and it's gone really well. We've got a lot of great feedback on it because, again, the only thing you had to really do was waste about 40 minutes of your time to figure out whether or not it was the best fit for you or not the best fit. And I've had a lot of people that have come back to me specifically that did not go to work for Sedwick, but that still have questions because they know that I will be there to answer them. Again, I meet people like you, Matt. I meet, old Guy Grand and some other folks in this industry, Greg Stokes, they're just good folks that will talk to you about anything you want to do about your career and kind of put you on the right track, whether you end up with them or not.
Yeah.
And I think that's the right thing to do in this industry. So I don't really have anything specific for what we're doing other than, as I've already talked about on this particular webinar today, which is, if you applied with us, make sure you keep your stuff updated. That's the biggest part of this. You got to log in regular to your profile. You got to keep it updated. You need to update your experience. A lot of people they'll apply. They'll put, I have a year of experience. 2 years goes by. They've never updated their profile, so they still have a year of experience. 'Cause that's all we know about them, right? You have to keep that kind of stuff updated. And I know that's the same at a lot of other companies that do things in this industry the same way that we do it. So keeping that kind of stuff updated. If people ever have questions, like I said, whether they're working here at Sedwick or not, they can always reach out to me. I'm more than happy to provide any kind of advice that either I made a mistake on or that I saw go well. Anything that I can do to help further careers, we certainly want to do that for people because I think it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So if they ask if FastTrack is legit, what do you say?
Oh, yeah, all the time. In fact, I use it on my orientations. I talk about it at the end. I usually mention you, and I mention that program. And people in the chat will say, hey, I went to FTD. Yeah, it's been a great program for us. We've been excited about the people that have come on board from there, especially because, like I said, a lot of them are always in areas of need where we have some daily needs. And if I flip one over that says, hey, this one is FastTrack. In fact, I normally get the email from Dean, and it says, the breakdown of what you guys say about them. And first thing I do is I look, and some of them have actually already been a member of our network, so we're going to get that updated right away. And then I flip it over to our deployment teams and dispatch, and I say, look, we got a graduate here. I think this is an area of need you've indicated that you have, and generally we can get them deployed pretty quickly. So it's been really helpful for us.
At NACA this year, I do this every year, but I was kind of taking the pulse of kind of where things are at, and I usually ask the AI question, and I get basically the same answers. But a couple of firms told me that they were fielding more field adjusters than ever, and I'm just curious. You had mentioned you guys do a lot of desk remote stuff. Do you still have a lot of need for field adjusters, or what's sort of the split
yeah.
there?
I mean, I say that desk work because it's just a lot of people want to work remotely these days. They're wanting to stay home. And I see a lot of people that want to work daily claims in the field. So, yes, we absolutely have. What I'm actually seeing is less people applying for CAT roles. We still have a ton applying for field, and we should, because there's a lot of that kind of work. But I think the reason a lot of people stopped applying for CAT roles is because, again, if I go back to when we started, the only thing that was available was CAT work. So you got deployed and you went wherever they told you to go. There was no daily option. Had there been, I might have stayed a field adjuster, but I had kids and I wanted to be at home, so I went the desk route because that was the only thing available to me at the time. Now the daily route really applies to a lot of people that fits what a lot of people are looking for. And so rather than having to go out on catastrophe that doesn't last near as long as it used to, these cycle times are really forcing firms rather to shut these things down very quickly, 30, 60, 90 days, and you're in and out of a storm. People that are not looking for that are looking to build their daily claim work. And I mean, Sedwick's bread and butter back before we acquired Cunningham Lindsay and Vericlaim and York, it was huge, this huge daily network of claims, and it's only gotten bigger. So we see a lot of people applying for field work and specifically on the daily side. Not that we don't deploy for catastrophes, because we do, but it's just one of those things that, a lot of people have begun building their daily claim resumes.
Sure. Well, Andrew, that was awesome. I really appreciate you taking some time out to chit chat with me.
You bet. I'm glad to do it. I appreciate you, Matt. I really do. I appreciate what you're doing there to educate people on this industry. I wish it had been around a long time ago when I started. We didn't even have, really, if you think about it, the internet was available, but not to the degree of these YouTube videos and people like yourself in this industry that come on board and they try to help people understand the next step. So, I always appreciate hopping on with you. And sorry I missed you out NACA this year. Didn't get to attend.
Yeah, I was disappointed.
I know. I appreciate that. I had my team told me a lot of people came by and asked for me, which is always nice to hear. But Yeah, it didn't work out this time. My intent, obviously, is to be at NACA coming up this next year in, I think, Choctaw is what I understand. So
yeah, yep.
We'll be there again, and look forward to seeing you guys again.
Getting licensed was just the starting line. As Andrew made clear, the real game is staying visible, staying relevant, and staying ready, especially when deployments slow down. So here's your move. Focus on the skills that firms like Sedwick actually care about. But did you know that your mind could be getting in the way of you making 6 figures as an adjuster? I go deep on why you could be thinking about this all wrong in this video right here. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and have a great storm.